They thought fake badges made them cops. They thought my daughter was an easy target. When HOA vigilantes snatched Sarah off her own street, zip tying her wrists in broad daylight, they missed one detail. Her dad trains Green Berets. This isn't a neighborhood watch. It's a kidnapping. And I won't negotiate. I'll hunt. They picked the wrong girl to kidnap. The thumping bass of her playlist was a familiar comfort as 15-year-old Sarah Walker walked to Northwood High, but it was violently interrupted by the predatory hum of an engine. A gleaming white SUV, devoid of any official markings, materialized beside her, its tires kissing the curb with unnerving precision that felt out of place on the sun-drenched streets of Willow Creek Estates. Before she could process the shift, two men in dark tactical uniforms, cheap imitations of real law enforcement, stepped out, their presence instantly shattering the neighborhood's carefully curated illusion of peace. Sarah bit her lip until copper blood flooded her tongue. Silence was survival. Dad's voice cut through the panic. Observe everything. The zip ties would tear her skin, but the real pain? Mrs. Henderson's curtain snapping shut. A witness choosing HOA perfection over a child. This was control escalating from passive-aggressive newsletters about lawn length to outright menace. The patches on their chests, WCCP Willow Creek Community Patrol, looked like something from a low-budget movie. The taller one, Captain Rex Thorne, puffed out his chest. Well, Bishop, he drawled, his voice slick with unearned authority. Look what we have here. Young lady, you seem to be loitering rather suspiciously. And if I'm not mistaken, that's hardly school-appropriate attire for Northwood High. He gestured vaguely at her jeans and band t-shirt. His partner, Carl Bishop, a silent, hulking figure, watched her with cold, flat eyes. Loitering? I'm walking to school, Sarah countered, her voice trembling less than she expected. Her father's words echoed, a lifeline. Observe, Sarah. Details. Stay calm. Don't let them see your fear. Northwood is just 2 blocks down. Thorne smirked, clearly enjoying himself. That's what they all say, sweetheart. But you fit a certain profile, and we've had reports of unusual activity. We'll need you to come with us. Standard procedure. Just a few questions. Come with you? Who are you people? Panic, sharp and cold, clawed at her throat, but she fought it down. You're not the police. I don't have to go anywhere with you. Oh, but I think you do, Bishop rumbled, his first and only words. He moved with surprising, brutal speed. Before Sarah could scream, her arm was seized in Thorne's vice-like grip. Her backpack slithered from her shoulder, thudding onto the pristine sidewalk. She felt the rasp of heavy-duty plastic as her wrists were yanked behind her back. The zip ties cinched painfully tight. The restraints tore her skin, but the real pain? Mrs. Henderson's curtain snapping shut. A witness choosing HOA perfection over a child's safety. They frog-marched her toward the SUV's open rear door. Through waves of terror and disbelief, her eyes darted across the street, snagging on that detail, Mrs. Henderson's lace curtains twitching, then falling still. A silent witness to the perfect crime unfolding in broad daylight. The SUV swallowed Sarah whole. 2 blocks away, John Walker scrolled security cam feeds, blissfully unaware his daughter now breathed stale fear in a makeshift cell. In 43 seconds, his world would detonate. Miles away, in the quiet of his home office, John Walker, a man whose life had been a study in controlled force and strategic calm, was about to have his carefully ordered world fractured by a single phone call. Northwood High's attendance office. Polite. Procedural. Mr. Walker, this is Carol from Northwood. We're just calling to verify Sarah's absence today. Is she unwell? The phone slipped from John's hand. Ice flooded his veins, then white-hot fury. 30 years of special ops training screamed one truth. They'd triggered a war, and Sarah was the objective. No, he said, his voice deceptively calm, a chilling counterpoint to the sudden ice in his veins. She left for school at her usual time. Why? The voice kept talking, but John was already moving. His training, honed over years as a Green Beret and now an elite skills instructor, kicked in. Panic was a luxury he couldn't afford. Action was necessity. He ended the call, his mind a razor-sharp instrument already sifting through possibilities, each one darker than the last. A quick check of Sarah's phone locator showed her last ping at 7:58 a.m., right near the edge of Willow Creek Estates on her usual route. Then nothing. Offline. He was at the door in under 60 seconds, his jaw set. Arriving at the quiet corner Sarah's phone indicated, his eyes, trained to see what others missed, scanned the scene. The sidewalk was pristine, almost too clean. But then he saw it. Sarah's navy blue backpack lying forlornly near the curb, its contents slightly spilled as if dropped in a struggle. A wave of cold fury washed over him, quickly compartmentalized. He knelt, examining faint, almost invisible impressions on the soft grass verge beside the curb. Wide tire tracks, heavier than a standard sedan. They parked right here. Two WCHA maintenance workers trimming hedges glanced nervously as John approached. They were regular staff, not Thorne's patrol. Morning, John said, his voice even, almost gentle, yet with an undercurrent that made both men stop their work. I'm looking for my daughter. She walks this way to school. Did you see a 15-year-old girl, brown hair, navy backpack, perhaps talking to anyone in a white SUV this morning? The men exchanged uneasy glances. Can't say we saw a girl, mister, one mumbled, avoiding eye contact. But there is that white SUV, belongs to the WCP Community Patrol guys. Captain Thorne, he drives it mostly. WCCP. John pressed, his gaze unwavering. What kind of patrol? Sort of security for the HOA, the other man offered, fidgeting with his shears. They keep an eye on things. Thorne's real serious about the rules. He lowered his voice. Acts like he's a real cop, if you ask me. Gives some of us the creeps. John nodded slowly, absorbing the information. Amateurs. Overzealous. And now, almost certainly, abductors. Thanks, he said, the single word carrying weight that made them step back. Walking back to his car, Sarah's backpack clutched in his hand. The pieces began to slot into place. This wasn't random. This was abuse of fabricated power. Inside his vehicle, he pulled out his phone, scrolling to a secure contact. Mark, it's John Walker, he said when the call connected, his voice low and urgent. I've got a priority one situation. My daughter Sarah, she's been taken. Possible abduction by a pseudo-cop outfit here in Willow Creek. Call themselves WCCP, run by a guy named Thorne. I need everything you can find on them. Fast and discreet. This is off the books until we know what we're dealing with. He listened for a moment. Understood. Thanks, Mark. Ending the call, John stared at the pristine, silent street. They thought they were untouchable. They thought they had his daughter. They had no idea who they'd just provoked. His hunt had begun. While John Walker's cold fury coalesced into a precise plan of action, his daughter Sarah was miles and a lifetime away from her familiar street. The journey in the back of the white SUV had been mercifully short, a terrifying blur of tinted windows, stale air freshener failing to mask something acrid beneath, and rough fabric against her cheek. Then an abrupt stop, engine cutting out, followed by doors opening. Sarah was hauled out not roughly, but with impersonal efficiency that was somehow more chilling. They were at the edge of Willow Creek Estates, at a dilapidated single-story maintenance building she vaguely remembered seeing from the distant bike path, a forgotten relic of the community's earlier development. Weeds clawed at its faded paint, and a battered sign reading WCHA Storage and Maintenance, authorized personnel only hung crookedly by one screw. This, apparently, was the grand headquarters of the Willow Creek Community Patrol. Inside, the air was damp and cool, smelling of mildew, stale coffee, and a faint metallic tang. A single bare bulb flickered overhead in a small windowless office furnished with a scarred metal desk, two mismatched chairs, and a filing cabinet that looked like it had lost a fight. Captain Rex Thorne gestured her into one of the chairs, a self-satisfied smirk playing on his lips. Officer Kyle Bishop simply stood by the door, arms crossed, a silent, imposing block. Right then, young lady, Thorne began, leaning back in his squeaky chair as if he were a seasoned detective in a high-stakes interrogation. Let's start again. Who are you really working with? Who sent you to scout our community? Sarah stared at him, genuine confusion warring with fear. Working? I already told you. I'm just a student. I go to Northwood High. My name is Sarah Walker. Even as she spoke, her father's voice resonated in her memory. Stay calm. Answer truthfully, but don't volunteer. And always, always observe. She forced herself to catalog the room. One door in, where Bishop stood. No other exits visible. The desk drawers were closed. Thorne had a cheap walkie-talkie clipped to his belt. The overhead light flickered again. Walker, you say? Thorne tapped a pen on the desk. We know your kind. Sneaking around, taking pictures, mapping out vulnerabilities. Are you with one of those activist groups trying to discredit fine, upstanding communities like Willow Creek? His questions were nonsensical, paranoid. I wasn't taking pictures, Sarah insisted, keeping her voice as even as she could. I was listening to music. My phone was in my pocket. Thorne leaned forward, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. Don't play games with me, girl. We have protocols. We know how to deal with troublemakers. This is a private matter of community security. No one even knows you're here. He seemed to relish that last part. A shiver traced down Sarah's spine at his implication, but then through the thin wall behind Thorne's desk, she heard a muffled snippet of conversation, another male voice, something about shift change and grabbing lunch. So there were more of them, at least one other. Good to know. Thorne glanced impatiently at his watch, then at Bishop. All right, keep an eye on her. I need to make a call. See how this supervisor wants to proceed with this one. We can't keep her in this glorified closet all day. He paused at the door, turning back with a cold smile. Cooperate by noon, or we transfer you to the farm. Sarah's blood froze. She'd heard kids whisper about the farm, where troublemakers vanished into thin air. The words hung in the stale air, heavy with unspoken threat. Sarah's stomach clenched, but as Thorne stepped out, his cheap walkie-talkie crackling, a tiny spark of her father's resolve ignited within her. They were amateurs, dangerous ones, playing at a game they didn't understand. In their arrogance, they might just make a mistake. She just had to be ready to see it. Her gaze swept the room again, methodically, imprinting every detail. Her fear was a cold, hard knot, but her mind was clear. She would watch. She would listen. She would survive. As Sarah Walker fought to master her fear within the WCP's makeshift prison, cataloging every detail, John was already processing actionable intelligence from Mark Olson. The information painted a grimly predictable picture. The white SUV was indeed registered to the Willow Creek Homeowners Association, a clear overstep of their remit. Captain Rex Thorne, the self-styled leader of the community patrol, was a former mall security guard, dismissed for overzealous enforcement and a string of minor harassment complaints. The WCP itself had no official standing, no legal authority whatsoever. They were, as John had suspected, a gang of vigilantes with HOA funding and a dangerous god complex, led by a man playing out power fantasies. This confirmation, however grim, solidified John's focus. Knowing what he was dealing with was one thing. Knowing where was the next crucial step. The maintenance building Sarah had been taken to was isolated, a forgotten corner of Willow Creek's sprawling property, the perfect den for Thorne's pseudo-cops. That night, under the cloak of a moonless sky, John Walker became the shadow he was trained to be. Dressed in dark, non-reflective clothing, he moved with silence and economy of motion that was second nature. John mapped the compound's flaws, flickering lights, sloppy patrol routes, amateurs playing soldier. Their greatest weakness? Arrogance. His advantage? Green Berets don't play. He spent over an hour in the cold, damp air, mapping the area in his mind. Two figures, likely WCP members, were visible through a grimy window in what appeared to be a break room. Their occasional bursts of laughter and television glow suggested unprofessional watch. He noted their sloppy, infrequent patrols around the building, one man every 30 minutes taking the same predictable route, his flashlight beam cutting lazy arcs. Child's play. John circled wider, identifying potential blind spots, approach routes, and, crucially, escape paths. A section of chain link fence at the rear was loose at the bottom. An overgrown cluster of bushes offered deep cover uncomfortably close to a side door that looked less sturdy than the front. During his close approach to that window, his heart nearly stopped. He was crouched low, examining the frame, when the side door creaked open not 20 feet away. One of Thorne's men stepped out, stretching and yawning, then fumbled for a cigarette. John froze, melting into the deeper shadow of a large, untrimmed hedge. Every muscle tensed, his breathing controlled to an almost imperceptible level. The man lit his cigarette, the flare briefly illuminating his bored face. He took a few puffs, oblivious, then grunted and went back inside, the door clicking shut. John let out a slow, silent breath. Too close, but it confirmed their carelessness. Back in his car before dawn, John reviewed his mental notes. The WCP were amateurs, but amateurs with his daughter. Mark Olson could eventually secure warrants, assemble a tactical team, but eventually was a word that clawed at John's gut. He didn't know what the farm Thorne had threatened Sarah with meant, but every instinct screamed that time was a luxury Sarah didn't have. These men were unpredictable, operating outside any rules. He couldn't risk bureaucratic delays. He couldn't risk a botched, heavy-handed official raid that might spook them into doing something desperate. The decision, when it came, was cold and clear, born of a father's love and a warrior's pragmatism. He would get Sarah out himself. Tonight, it wouldn't be an assault. It would be an extraction, precise and silent. He drove home as the first hint of gray lightened the eastern sky, not to rest, but to make his own quiet preparations. He selected specific tools from a locked case in his workshop, items chosen not for destruction, but stealth and efficiency: a slim pry bar, a compact multi-tool, a small high-powered flashlight with a red filter, dark gloves. His face was a mask of grim determination. The time for gathering intelligence was over. Dawn was breaking. It was time to bring his daughter home. The first gray tendrils of dawn were just beginning to paint the eastern sky when John Walker, moving like a phantom, approached the western perimeter of the WCHA maintenance compound. The brief period of near total darkness before sunrise, when alertness was often at its lowest, was his chosen window. He slipped through the loose section of chain link fence he'd identified hours earlier, the overgrown weeds muffling any sound. The air was still, broken only by distant bird chirps and the low intermittent hum from a nearby electrical substation. As predicted, the single patrolling WCCP guard, a heavy-set man John didn't recognize, was making his rounds with bored indifference, his flashlight beam a lazy metronome. John waited motionless in the deep shadow of the leaning pallets until the guard passed his position, then moved with liquid speed. Before the guard could even register a change in the shadows behind him, John was on him. One hand clamped over the man's mouth, stifling any cry. An arm snaked around his throat in a perfectly applied chokehold. There was a brief, desperate struggle, quickly subdued. John lowered the unconscious man gently to the ground, efficiently securing his hands and feet with heavy-duty cable ties he brought, and relieved him of his cheap walkie-talkie. One down. The side door, as he'd suspected, was poorly secured. A minute's focused work with the slim pry bar, shielded by his body, and the lock clicked open with a barely audible snick. He eased the door open an inch, listening. Faint sounds of television, a low murmur of voices, the break room he'd observed. He bypassed it, his objective clear. Sarah had been in what Thorne called his office. He moved through a short, dimly lit corridor, his rubber-soled boots making no sound on the grimy linoleum. He paused at a door marked office, authorized personnel only, the lettering peeling. He could hear low, intermittent snoring from within, Kyle Bishop, most likely if Thorne had left him on guard duty. John tested the knob, unlocked. Thorne's arrogance was proving to be his undoing. John's blade slit the lock. One breath. Two. Behind the door, Bishop's snores and Sarah's terrified whimper. But the real danger? Thorne's voice hissing through the next door. Prep the van. We move her in 10. Easing the door open, John confirmed his assessment. Bishop was slumped in the desk chair, head lolled back, mouth open in a sonorous snore. The television in the corner flickered with an early morning infomercial. A half-eaten sandwich sat on the desk beside him. John moved with the same swift precision as before. Bishop never even woke up. He was incapacitated and secured before his next snore could fully form. 2 down. And then he saw her. Sarah was in the far corner, curled on the floor, awake, her eyes wide in the dim light filtering from the corridor. Relief, fierce, and overwhelming washed through John, but he kept it locked down. He put a finger to his lips, then moved to her side. "Dad," she mouthed, tears welling. He quickly and expertly cut the zip ties on her wrists, his touch gentle. "Are you hurt?" he whispered, his voice barely a breath. She shook her head, rubbing raw wrists. "Just scared. Thorne, he was in here earlier. He went to a back room through there." She gestured to another door at the rear of the office. "He said something about the farm. Moving me this afternoon." John's jaw tightened. "Not anymore." He helped her to her feet. "Stay behind me, no matter what." The door to the back room was slightly ajar. John could hear Thorne's voice, low and irritated. Apparently on a phone call. "Don't care what the HOA guidelines say. This girl is a troublemaker. Yeah, by noon we'll have her officially transferred. No paper trail on our end." John pushed the door open fully. Rex Thorne, leaning against another metal desk, phone pressed to his ear, looked up, his eyes widening in disbelief, then confusion, then dawning fear as he saw John, a figure of silent, lethal intent, filling the doorway. Sarah was a pale shadow behind him. "Who the hell are you?" Thorne stammered, dropping the phone. He fumbled for the walkie-talkie on his belt. "Doesn't matter who I am," John said, his voice a low growl. He crossed the small room in 2 strides, his hand shooting out, deflecting Thorne's arm as he reached for the radio, then twisting it with practiced ease. Thorne cried out, a yelp of pain and shock, as the radio clattered to the floor. "You took my daughter," John stated, his eyes like chips of ice. That was a very big mistake. Thorne, his face ashen, found a sliver of his old bluster. "This is an official WCCP facility. You're trespassing. I'll have you arrested." John almost smiled. He picked up a pair of zip ties from Thorne's desk, identical to the ones that had bound Sarah. "I don't think so." Within seconds, Captain Rex Thorne, the self-proclaimed authority of Willow Creek, was securely bound, his bravado completely gone, replaced by whimpering terror. John looked at him with cold contempt. "It's over, Thorne." He turned to Sarah, his expression softening instantly. "Let's go home." He led her out the way he'd come, past the unconscious, bound forms of Thorne's officers and into the cool, clean air of the approaching dawn. As they slipped through the gap in the fence and into the gray anonymity of the waking town, Sarah leaned against him, a shuddering sigh of relief escaping her. John held her close for a moment, the father eclipsing the soldier. "You're safe now, Sarah Bear," he whispered. "You're safe." But as he scanned the quiet streets, his mind was already shifting. This part was done. The next was just beginning. The rising sun cast long shadows as John Walker drove away from the dilapidated maintenance building, Sarah beside him wrapped in a blanket he kept in the car. She was quiet, leaning against his arm, the adrenaline from her ordeal slowly ebbing away, leaving profound exhaustion in its wake. For John, however, the adrenaline was still a controlled burn. His daughter was safe, but the individuals responsible for her terror were still, in a larger sense, at liberty. Their corrupt little empire still standing. That was about to change. His first stop was a prearranged discreet location where Mark Olson had arranged for a trusted female colleague, a victim support specialist, to meet them. Sarah needed to feel secure, to recount her experience in a calm environment, and John needed to ensure his next steps wouldn't be compromised by his immediate presence at a crime scene he'd technically just created. As Sarah, pale but composed, began to give her statement, John stepped away to make his own call. Mark, John's voice was low, devoid of any triumph, only grim purpose. Sarah's out. She's safe. The WCP facility, that old maintenance shed on the east perimeter of Willow Creek, has 3 officers currently incapacitated and secured inside. Thorne, Bishop, and 1 other. They need to be picked up before anyone stumbles upon them or they manage to get loose. Sarah's testimony will confirm unlawful detention, among other things. Thorne was on the phone when I found him, talking about transferring her by noon. No paper trail. You need to move fast. Mark Olson didn't waste time. Within the hour, a convoy of official, unmarked law enforcement vehicles, a mix of FBI and state police tactical units, descended upon the WCP's ramshackle headquarters. There was no dramatic shootout, no prolonged siege. It was a swift, professional takedown. Officers armed with federal warrants breached the building, finding the 3 WCP members exactly as John had described, bound and seething, their pathetic charade of authority utterly dismantled. As detectives and forensic teams began their meticulous work, the true nature of Thorne's operation started to emerge from the dingy office. They found stacks of crudely printed citation forms detailing ludicrous offenses, suspicious footpath deviation, failure to comply with community walking protocol, unauthorized photography of HOA property. Most were targeting teenagers or unfamiliar visitors. A locked filing cabinet easily opened revealed files on several Willow Creek residents containing handwritten notes of surveillance and petty infractions. In Thorne's desk, they discovered a binder labeled WCCP Operational Protocols, a document filled with self-important jargon and illegally assumed powers, shockingly authorized by what appeared to be minutes from a Willow Creek HOA board meeting. Financial records on a cheap laptop linked payments from WCHA funds, disguised as community safety enhancements, directly to a shell corporation named Aegis Community Solutions, a company Olson's initial check had flagged as having ties to Rex Thorne himself. They even found a box of fake WCCP patches and cheap imitation security badges, one ostentatiously labeled Chief Thorne. By late morning, Mark Olson called John. We've got them, John, and the place is a gold mine of prosecutable idiocy. Your daughter is a brave kid. Her statement is solid gold. But it gets better or worse, depending on how you look at it. The paper trail from Thorne's office doesn't just stop with him. It leads straight up the ladder, directly implicating members of the Willow Creek HOA board. This isn't just a few rogue clowns. This was sanctioned. John listened, grim satisfaction settling in. The immediate threat to Sarah was over. Now the larger, more insidious rot within Willow Creek Estates was about to be exposed to the harsh light of real justice. Mark Olson's prediction that the rabbit hole plunged deep into Willow Creek Estates proved to be an understatement. The evidence meticulously gathered from Rex Thorne's makeshift office, combined with Sarah Walker's unshakable testimony, unraveled the WCHA's rotten core with alarming speed. Federal and state investigators, armed with a slew of warrants, descended upon the homes of select HOA board members and the almost invisible office of Aegis Community Solutions. The arrests followed swiftly. Thorne, Bishop, and their handful of WCP patrolmen were the first to be charged, facing a litany of felonies including unlawful detention, impersonating law enforcement, and conspiracy. But the hammer of justice didn't stop there. Within weeks, several prominent members of the Willow Creek Homeowners Association board, including its overbearing president, found themselves in handcuffs, indicted for misuse of community funds, conspiracy to commit unlawful acts, and reckless endangerment for sanctioning and bankrolling Thorne's illegal militia. The local news stations had a field day, plastering the once pristine image of Willow Creek Estates across screens with headlines screaming of corruption and vigilantism. The initial shock among residents quickly morphed into widespread outrage. Community meetings, once sparsely attended affairs focused on lawn maintenance and holiday decorations, became packed, fiery forums where homeowners demanded accountability and wholesale change. The carefully constructed facade of serene, orderly Willow Creek had been irrevocably shattered, revealing the rot beneath. The legal and financial fallout was immense. Civil suits, spearheaded by John Walker on behalf of Sarah and joined by other families who had previously been intimidated or dismissed by Thorne's WCP, mounted against the indicted board members and the now defunct HOA. Faced with overwhelming legal pressure and public condemnation, the Willow Creek Homeowners Association was formally dissolved by court order. In its place, a new resident-led interim council was formed. Their first act, a commitment to complete transparency and a vow to rebuild trust. They worked closely with city officials and legitimate local law enforcement to establish a new community charter, one that emphasized genuine safety through cooperation, not control through intimidation. The name Willow Creek Estates, now tainted by scandal, was overwhelmingly voted by residents to be retired. They chose Hollow Commons, a nod to the area's natural geography and a symbol of a fresh, more open beginning. The reign of the Shadow Patrol was decisively over. The community was at last taking back its voice and its peace. Months later, Sarah walked past Hollow Commons' new park. No more WCP patches, just kids laughing. Thorne? Serving 15 years. The HOA president? Broke and disgraced. John watched from the porch, coffee steaming. They never learn, Dad, Sarah said, gesturing at the peaceful scene. He smiled, putting an arm around her shoulders. No. But now? The whole town knows. Mess with our kids, and you answer to me. As autumn leaves began to paint the streets of newly christened Hollow Commons in hues of gold and crimson, a different kind of quiet settled over the Walker household. Not the oppressive silence of fear that had briefly gripped their lives, but the comforting quiet of healing and renewed strength. Sarah, though more watchful of the world around her, had rediscovered her stride. The shadows of her ordeal were still there, but they no longer dictated her steps. She walked to Northwood High with quiet confidence, her resilience a testament to her spirit and the unwavering support of her father. One evening, sitting with John on their porch swing, watching fireflies begin their nightly dance, she finally asked, "Dad, why do people like Thorne do things like that? Try to control everyone." John put an arm around her, his gaze thoughtful. "Sometimes, Sarah, people mistake power for strength. They forget that true strength lies in protecting others, not dominating them. They build their little kingdoms on fear because they're afraid themselves." He paused, then added, "But they also forget that there are always people willing to stand up to them. People like you who stayed strong and observant." Sarah leaned her head on his shoulder. "You stood up to them, Dad." A rare, soft smile touched John's lips. "Always for you, Sarah Bear." In Hollow Commons, whispers of John Walker's quiet, decisive action circulated with a mixture of awe and profound respect. No one spoke of it loudly, but the legend of the unassuming father who had single-handedly dismantled a corrupt local power structure to save his daughter became a silent, indelible part of the community's reformed identity. He sought no accolades, content in the knowledge that his daughter was safe and that a measure of real justice had been restored. The system that had allowed such abuse of power had been broken, and in its place, something better, more accountable, was beginning to grow. For John Walker, That was victory enough. The echoes of that terrible Tuesday morning would linger, but so too would the enduring lesson that courage, family, and an unwavering commitment to what's right could indeed topple any fake empire.